Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Facebook Live AGO from Home. Today, we are holding a roundtable discussion on how to talk about anti-Black racism. I will begin with a land acknowledgement. So I want to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This was also the home of the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat. This meeting place is home to many First Nation Métis and Inuit across Turtle Island since time immemorial. So I will go into our talk. I will show a few images. My name is Audrey Hudson. I'm the Associate Curator of Schools and Early Childhood Programs here at the Art Gallery of Ontario. The format for today will be, I will do an introduction. I will show some pieces of art. We will then open it up to our panel discussion. We will do introductions, and then there's a series of two questions that we will offer our answers to. And then we will, time permitting, we will take 1 to 2 questions at the end. So thank you. Okay, so the intent behind this talk was by the protests across North America in response to violence against Black people and anti-Black racism. And it is a stark reminder that our society has a long way to go to be fair and just. We want to let you know that we stand in solidarity with Black communities and our hearts are with you. My intent for this panel, bringing this panel together, bringing this powerful group of speakers together, was to think about Black futures. I want to think about Black futures. I want to make sure that there is a place in the future for Blackness. And we are using art as a starting point. I do want to be clear, however, that this is a starting point. There is a lot of work that you will need to do in order to have these bold, brave conversations with yourself and then the young people. This conversation is thinking about how we talk about anti-Black racism with young people in our lives. And I want to say, I do want to preface that this topic needs to be held with openness to learn, openness to listen, and openness to act. And we all are working on, we're working on language, and this is a support. This talk is, or this discussion is a support to have or enter into those conversations. All right, the 3 pieces of art, if we could just go back to the first one, 3 pieces of art from the AGO's collection I want to introduce, and our panelists may speak to them or not, but just as starting points as we can think about the collection at the AGO. And the AGO is Art Gallery of Ontario. It is not perfect, of course, no institution is perfect, but this is, these 3 pieces here are just a snippet of what's in the collection. This piece was a new acquisition by Esma Muhammad. It's a Seat Above the Table, Warren Moon, and this is 2018. This is in the McLean Center for Indigenous and Canadian Art at the Art Gallery. Next. And then these next 2 images speak to protest. So they speak to what is happening around George Floyd's life and many other Black people whose lives have been taken at the hands of the police. So this is actually a protest, as I said, from the AGO's archive in the library. And you can see the signs, Black artists are out there, Black communities are out there. Following slide. Yeah, and then just the questions about who is art for, rich people, white people, some people, them people, people. So I wanted to show these images because I want to continue to question where our place is. Where is the place for Black voices in communities, in institutions, art institutions, cultural institutions like the AGO. Thank you. And then end. All right. And so now I would like to go around and let's hear who is in this roundtable. So please, panelists, I'll go around the square. And if you could just say a few lines of your affiliation, the work that you do, and anything else that you'd like to add. So we'll start with Frida.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Great. My name is Freda Bizimana. I am a youth justice worker with an agency called Delta Family Resource Center. And I work with a program called Ounce Prevention, and we work with Black youth in conflict with the law. Just to locate myself, I am born in Toronto, raised in Richmond Hill in the suburbs. My family is from Rwanda, so I'm a proud Rwandese. I'm still learning a lot about my culture every day, but nonetheless, I'm on that journey. So back with Ounce Prevention, we do amazing work in the community all over the GTA, working with Black youth ages 15 to 29 in conflict with the law, in conflict at school, in conflict within their home or any other needs that they need. We're there for them. And our program is really set on creating a Toronto where the future of Black youth and racialized youth is not determined by the criminal justice system. So I'm very passionate about that work and using art to express. So my artist name is IMF, which stands for In My Feelings. And I actually had the pleasure of performing at the AGO in February for Black History Month for Family Sundays, where I performed my piece, Little Black Girl. And I'll get into that a little later, but that's pretty much me.
Thank you. Joy?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joy Martyr-Andre. I am a visual artist and an educator with the Toronto District School Board. I do a lot of intensive work around equity, and I'd like to hear what Frida said about community, because one of the pieces we're really working on in the school is building that sense of community. That school is not just the student and the teacher, but the school community and the parents as well. I'm pleased to be here and happy to be on this panel with all these wonderful people.
Thank you. Quinton?
All right, greetings, bonjour, wagwan, everyone. I am Quentin VerCetty. I'm an education officer at the Art Gallery of Ontario. And I'm also the founder. I'm here speaking as the founder of the Black Speculative Arts Movement Canada Institute, and one of the founding members of the movement itself globally. And we focus on creating opportunities and platforms for artists, Black creatives around the world, and also Black creative organizations, focusing on how can we push the representation and push the imagination of how Blackness is represented today and for the future and for many tomorrows. And so we do this through programs, projects, and partnerships. Like with the AGO, we have partnered many times. We also are creating books and different products to help people engage with this idea of pushing, once again, representation. And I have co-written a book with the great Audrey Hudson, Dr. Audrey Hudson, called Cosmic Underground Northside Incantations of Black Speculative Content. I think that's what it's called. Discontent, right? Something like that. Google it, please. But, and that book is the first catalog of Black Canadian art and essays, and there's amazing content, and I think it's also going to be an amazing tool once it becomes available worldwide, which will be soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Sam?
Okay, thank you, Audrey, AGO, and team for convening us and for having this. So yeah, I'm Sam Tecle. I work with a couple different contexts. I work with Success Beyond Limits educational organization up in Jana and Finch. I teach at New College at U of T. And I think I've, in many ways, been having these kinds of conversations our whole lives. So very thankful to be here and very blessed to learn from everybody and to learn with each other. So thank you. And not, it's not lost on me the moment we're in, right? So we're having this conversation while folks are fighting in the streets and burning buildings, perhaps to a different world. So let's hope for that. So thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Mosa? Mosa?
Yes. Hi, my name is Mosa McNeilly. I've worked for 30 years as an interdisciplinary artist, educator, and editor. I'm a member of the Dawa Collective, the Coco Collective, and Inner City Angels. And I'm an initiated sacred leader with Sacred Women International. I'm a graduate of OCAD-U in the School of the Toronto Dance Theatre with studies at Parsons School of Design and the Royal Conservatory of Music. And I've received teachings from African and Indigenous spiritual leaders. And I hold a master's in environmental studies from York University. I was one of the artists in the historical 1989 exhibition, Black Women, When and Where We Enter, the first exhibition of Black women artists in Canadian history. I'm currently working with the Dawa Collective and with curator Andrea Fatona to mount an exhibition marking this event. I was the manuscript editor on 2 AGO publications, the 2017 OAAG award-winning Theaster Gates, How to Build a House Museum, and Every Now Then, Reframing Nationhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mosa. All right, and then Jayda?
Can everyone hear me? Hi everyone, my name is Jayda Marley. I'm an arts educator, a youth leader, and a workshop facilitator. So I work with One Mic educators to teach youth spoken word and rap and just how to use their voices for good in their community. I also work as a peer supporter with the Community Healing Project. So I just basically run workshops with youth. We talk about things like mental health, just healing and things like that. I'm also the founder for the Queer Colored Girls After Me. So basically it's an annual show that just basically spotlights queer people of color, specifically Black and Indigenous people though, because that's just my ancestry and those are the people I try to show up for. I'm also one of the founders of Not Another Black Life. So it's basically an organization put together in a few days after what's been happening with the police brutality across Turtle Island. And we had a protest last week and we're planning to do more things right now. So yeah, that's what I do. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jayda. And Emmanuel?
Hey, everybody. My name is Emmanuel Tabi, and I come to this conversation from a few different avenues. Firstly, I want to say thank you, Audrey. I'm really grateful to be here, and hello, everybody. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak with you all. I was a spoken word poet for about 14 years. I'm a percussionist with Legend of Motown, and I'm a PhD candidate at U of T, and my work looks at how Black young men have used rapping and spoken word poetry, specifically with their activism and education work. And some key points that I bring to this conversation is like that from the conversation with these young men is the importance of healing and the violence that's imposed on us from childhood, right? And the importance that we heal and use our cultural production as a form of healing. So I'm excited to be part of this conversation, as I said before, and learn from you all. This is a brilliant gathering, and I'm excited to be part of it.
Okay, thank you. Brilliance around the square. So thank you all. Let's get into the questions. I have the 2 questions. I'll start with the first one. And as I said, we'll go around the circle again. Maybe I'll start from the verse order, or if anyone wants to go first, you can just pop your hand up and I can see each space. Okay. Question 1, and each of you have alluded to this in your, I've worked personally with each of you in some way. And so I know your work, I admire your work, and I learn from your work. And so that's why I invited you to be on this panel with me and at my current workplace at the AGO. So these conversations are happening, as I think many of you said, as Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We have these conversations around race quite early. And so now, though, at the forefront is thinking about how do we have these conversations more broadly with young people. And so how do we talk to young people about anti-Black racism in classroom and community settings? So that's the first question, and I'll open it up to the floor. Would anyone like to go first?
I could go first, Audrey.
Sure, we'll go Sam, and then I'll just go around.
Okay, so I think in the current moment or the current context, we've seen, excuse me, such an explosion in interest in thinking about police brutality, racism, white supremacy, and the long arc or the long history of these kinds of realities from which I think Black and racialized folks are most upfront at the interface. So I think the constant question of how do we talk to young people, or how do we do that conversation, I wonder for whom that question is a question, because I want us to hold on to the fact that for Black folks, for racialized folks and Indigenous folks, this talk is not a choice. This is a conversation about life and death, right? It is a conversation about how do we prepare our young people or each other and create alternative care networks that do not involve the police because we want to stay alive. We have these stories in our community long before they hit the cameras or the screens or the national protest. So I constantly think about that, right? So I want all of us to think about when we talk to young people, how for some people, and hold on to the fact that it's a deathly conversation. It's a conversation about how do we keep alive and stay alive in this moment. And then second to that, I always think about that race and white supremacy itself is so prevalent that we don't start these conversations with young people from zero. They already know, they understand and see race. So it's more about how do we convene and pull that out to have that conversation rather than the fact that we are introducing something new to them. They know these things. They know how they can observe how society is structured. So I think it's on us as educators to think about how we constantly infuse this conversation across all of our subject matters, across all of our areas, and create the safe/unsafe space to have these very difficult conversations. So that's kind of some initial thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Quinton?
Can you just repeat the question one more time?
Yeah, how do we talk to young people about anti-Black racism in the classroom and in community settings?
Yeah, sheesh. I do have a list of things that I believe educators could do. And feel free if anyone wants to disagree or add to it, et cetera, or take away. So one of the things I forgot to mention is that I am completing my master's. Well, I would have been done if it wasn't for COVID, but I'm completing my master's at Concordia University, my master's in art education. And I'm looking at Afrofuturism as an art pedagogy. And so what that really is recentering and recalibrating African and Africa's impact and contributions to all subject matters. And so we use STEAM, and it's science, technology, and engineering, arts, and metaphysics. And metaphysics includes meditation and mathematics, along with mental health and all type of well-being. And so with that said, I personally believe as an educator within the gallery system, but also an educator within schools, I believe that educators should recognize and follow the following about anti-Black racism. First, I think it's important that we make sure when we're talking about this, it's not just focused as a Black and white thing. It's systemic, and it's important that we emphasize that it's systemic and it's not natural for anti-Black racism is taught, and it also can be untaught and unlearned. And so within the Afrofuturistic framework, we can talk about how we are unlearning how we think about Black people in the future, right? And the potential of Blackness, right? And also then uncovering histories like Matthew DaCosta, who is one of the first people documented, one of the first Africans documented coming to North America and wasn't a slave. And I can give you many examples, but I just want to not take up too much space. But it's important that we also be mindful of language as it relates to colonization and white supremacy. For example, the term of visible minority and also the term slavery versus enslavement. So visible minority speaks to the idea of power, right? When I looked it up on Google, the population of Europe is less than 1 billion people. The population of Africa is almost 2 billion. So now we're talking about position of power when we talk about visible minority. So we need to be conscious of a language that we use. And so we also need to start making it seem like enslavement of African people and systemic treatment of Black and brown bodies was long ago, and address that it still happens today in examples like the prison industrial complex, and chattel slavery was less than 4 generations away. So for example, my great-grandfather was born enslaved. So that's not too far from here. And so, so recognizing that it's still present and that there's still work to do also creates an urgency. And so it's important also for educators to recognize that when we talk about anti-Black racism, that we're not talking about being against white people. We're not talking about being against European powers. And then the last 2 points is we should avoid generalizing any group when we're doing that things, and also avoid making people feel guilty and give examples of allyship. And the last point is give space for emotions. And so my last point to this note is an educator named Howard Stevenson speaks about giving space. And he says, calculate, locate, communicate, breathe, and exhale. So it's just allowing you to have your emotions, allow people to have their emotions, but then encourage them to explore those emotions. And that's the broad way I believe that we can talk about race within the classroom.
Okay, thank you. Frida, can we go up to you?
Yeah, sure.
Mhm.
So yeah, when I saw this question, you know, my thoughts were racing. I was like, honestly, like I'm just like, I don't know. Like, I'm like, you know, been feeling really, my heart's been heavy, frustrated, angry, as most of us are. And sometimes, you know, I'm like, you know what, this is not for me to fix. I get like, sometimes I feel like, you know, like what did I do? Like, you know, this is who I am. Why do I got to deal with all this? Why do we got to deal with this? So there's anger that comes to it. But when I look at the school system, I grew up in Richmond Hill. So my Blackness was challenged many times just because I was smart. I speak a certain way. And I was fighting anti-Black racism before I even knew the term anti-Black racism or what that even meant. If I didn't study social work, I don't think I would even understand what systemic racism is, how it affects my life. And now looking at it and just learning and educating myself, I'm like, wow, I've been really experiencing this all my life. You know, I have been sheltered and I don't have experience as some of my clients do, but we are all Black and we do experience racism, and it really impacts our mental health and just our way of being, like, it just affects us daily. So when it comes to schools, I think, you know, it's not enough to just learn about the history where it's one-sided. Like, you know, the history I learned, I was just like, I barely learned about anything, to be honest with you, that applied to me and my history and what actually affects us till today. They made it seem like it was something of the past. We had that Black History Month, only 1 month we talk about Black history, but it's like, we're more than just slavery. There's so much more to us. And till this day, it still affects us till this day. So we need to have those real raw conversations in the classrooms and not shy away from it. And really bringing out those people's stories, bring stories into the classroom. I think even if those who are non-Black, they need to understand and feel through those stories. They may not know what it feels like to be Black. I understand that. I can't fault you for that. But I definitely think bringing stories and real life experiences into the classroom can open their eyes so that they can feel. And I know we're going to get into this, but art is the greatest way to kind of bring that home. So I definitely feel like experiences, and, you know, the fact that we have to see George Floyd die on camera, like literally murdered, the fact that that had to be seen, and that's when people took, you know what I mean? Like, it's sad. It hurts. It hurts. And so in the classroom, we can't shy away from this. This is not something of the past. This is right now. This affects us every day. Race affects us every day. And Black Lives Matter. We need that conversation and not shy away from it. Yeah, so that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Emmanuel?
Hi. As I was listening to y'all speak and thinking about what Sam was saying, like, we already experienced this, right? Like, and I'm thinking about my son, and there was an incident where, like, we're at Aaron Mills Town Center in an elevator, and these people were just staring at him with such hatred. He was 3 months old and he doesn't know better, and he's just staring at them, and they're just looking him up and down. In that moment, like, first I was shocked, right? Like, most people think he's cute, and in that moment, how do you tell, like, when he gets older, maybe 3 4, how do you get him to talk about this? And I think the great thing about our cultural production and is that you don't need words, right? You don't need words. And so when in the classroom, and speaking about these things, acknowledging that many children, again, have experienced this, and asking them what helps them, and simply having a safe space, right? Having that conversation acknowledges that it's important to the teachers, to the principals, to the administrators, right? So our experiences are no longer silenced, or deemed as something that doesn't happen all the time, right? Not only have we been silenced, or we're resisting marginalization and being silenced, but it really doesn't leave you. Like, I'm sure a lot of us on this panel, like the things we've experienced as children are still with us, right? And so again, creating those spaces where we specifically speak about anti-Black racism, first of all, and second of all, bringing people into the classroom that are from the community, right? I know like Quinton does this work. I've seen him do it, and it's incredible. And but as a Black boy, I never really had a Black educator, right? So to see somebody come in there that looks like me and is not only acknowledging what I've been through, but affirming my reality is absolutely huge. So those are just some things, and I'm sure all of us have these same ideas, right? That we could do to speak about these things in the classroom, speak about anti-Black racism.
Thank you. Jayda?
I think when I first heard this question, I was a little bit stressed out. I didn't know if I could answer it, but then I thought back to maybe grade 3 or grade 2, and I remember we read The Diary of Anne Frank, and it started to make me think, why was it okay for us to read that at such a young age? But when people bring up the talks about talking about anti-Black racism so young, they think it's too hard, it's too much for people to hear, and it will hurt people's feelings. But I think that if we can talk about those experiences at such a young age, and for me, The Diary of Anne Frank was really educational. I became really interested in that, and I wanted to know more. And the weird thing was, I learned about that before I learned about slavery, and before I learned about the things that Black people went through, and what Indigenous people went through. And so yeah, it's not impossible. I don't think it's impossible to teach children who are young about anti-Black racism. I don't think it's impossible to teach youth. One thing that I think would really help is if we brought people in, like real experiences. I remember people used to bring in like soldiers. Why can't we bring in elders? Why can't we bring in just older Black and Indigenous folk to talk about the things that have happened, and talk about real life stories? And as a kid, I think elders were someone who I always listened to, because they always have stories to tell, and they can always tell it in a way that it won't be hard for you to hear or imagine. And yeah, so I think through art and through storytelling, it will always be possible. It will always be possible, and we can do that at different levels. If it's at grade 3, we talk about one thing, and grade 4, and then in grade 9, and then in high school. There's different levels. Of course, we can't learn all at one time. We can't handle it on our mental health. But I also think it's really important for schools to try, because for me, I didn't grow up in my dad's home. I grew up in my mom's home. So my mom didn't really know how to talk to me about anti-Black racism. She would just kind of be like, that's just how it is. That's just how things are different for you. But she wasn't able to tell me from her firsthand experience what it feels like to be called certain names at school, to go to a Catholic school and hear certain things about myself from my peers. And so yeah, I just think it's important to get it into schools, and for schools to use different tools for different age groups. I don't think it's impossible. I think they should do it the same way they taught us their history. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And many of you are getting into, the second question of art. So let it come out. Let it, if you want, we'll go around again, but please let it, let it flow. Mosa.
Yeah, I just, I think about the conversations I have with my daughter. She's a teenager, and, we're sitting watching Netflix, and something comes on that is portraying violence against Black people, and I just burst into tears. And I've had to explain to her that I'm traumatized by witnessing the violence against Black bodies in the media. So she, and then, I'm so impressed with her anti-racist politics, her decolonial feminist politics, but at the same time, I feel so heartbroken that she's forced to have this, analysis already, I mean, she's a teenager already, but she's been developing it over time, so, when I go into the classroom and I talk with youth about anti-Black racism, I make space for them to unload their feelings of outrage and sorrow. I talk to them about trauma and about self-care strategies, and I frame self-care as ongoing and vital work that we must do as people of African descent to heal from the impacts of anti-Black racism. And I talk to young children in the classroom. I witness the impacts of anti-Black racism on their behavior, their self-confidence, their ability, their desire to learn. And we know they're marginalized. So I do my best to provide hope and advocate. I advocate for this. Sometimes I have to come head to head with the teachers because I'm a guest in the classroom. And so I'm witnessing the anti-Black racism from the actual teachers in the classroom. So I advocate for the children. I support the alienated students so they can begin to imagine that they belong to a community of care. You know, I feel a great responsibility to Black youth and children as a Black artist educator. I create socially engaged, culturally responsive, Black-centered projects, even if it's not a totally Black population in the classroom. And those programs are designed to uplift and nurture them. You know, I want to build self-worth and instill African cultural literacy. So I hold space for them to dialogue about their lived experience. And I give them the sort of the decolonial, anti-racist context so they can see where their experience fits into this societal context. And then I immerse them in African arts forms and aesthetics. And I teach them about Pan-African history. This empowers them. It gives them a sense of a global African identity. They start to realize they have this cultural inheritance that is so powerful. And, you know, so this, I really hope that this prepares them to succeed in their life pursuits and contribute meaningfully to society.
Thank you. Thank you, Mosa. And Joy?
So I teach in the secondary panel, and reading this question, I approached it from this perspective of, you know, if I were to have to present this in professional development with teachers, what would I say? And I would say that you need to create the conditions for this conversation. And what I mean is that if you're going to have meaningful dialogue about anti-Black racism, then you need to create a space that is respectful, positive, and inclusive. And what that means is that if something problematic or something negative is raised, the space is comfortable enough that it's raised in that space, and then it's unpacked and dismantled, creating this space of caring and social responsibility. And what does that look like? Like, what does the classroom look like? What does the content look like? Are we, you know, introducing students to authentic Black voices? Are we having imagery in the classroom that's representative of the subject that we're talking about? And when we begin to lay, you know, the ground of that, you know, this collective social responsibility, then we can begin to give students some tools and some strategies on how to develop this critical consciousness, how to think through these issues of anti-Black racism and why it's a collective responsibility. I feel that one of our starting places is exploring identity. Start with the self, talk about personal identities and intersecting identities and multiple identities, because that's where they're at. You know, they have that social location. They're able to have that, start from that piece. I think that good conversation encourages reflection and listening, and we make sure that we're centering Black voices in that conversation, teaching students the language of power, right? The language of oppression and the resilience of Black folk. It's important to bring this to students, to make them aware. You've got everybody in the classroom, and recognizing that the way Black students interact with this information is going to be different than how other students might interact with this conversation, but to make that space inclusive for everyone. So I think questioning is a good way, this critical inquiry, offering students, the opportunity to really think deeply. And again, that's providing those tools to build a critical consciousness and to build that collective responsibility. And I also think that when we're having these discussions, it's certainly not a one-off. It's certainly something that needs to be carried on, but remembering that in creating the space that is positive and inclusive, we need to be thoughtful about how it is we are working within that space, so that at the end of a class or a session, we are not leaving students with high anxiety, but we are actually giving them an opportunity to speak, to answer some of these questions, and know that there's a continuation of learning, right? So I think about, what do teachers need? Well, they need to, and maybe this can translate for parents too, but create that space where these conversations are happening, right? All these students are exposed to social media. Everyone knows what's been happening. Everybody knows what's been going on. And the lived experiences of some are that they have always experienced this piece. So have that social justice lens, the classroom should be a space that's inclusive, that encourages voice, and also provide students to understand what authentic representations of Black voices look like.
Okay, thank you all. Thinking about what I heard and what I'm gathering, mental health came up, I think, with each and every one of you, and many of your areas of expertise is within mental health, the arts, and with the lens of social justice. So perhaps the second question, could we think about how we use art as an entry point, and or if you'd like to answer or expand upon how we take care of mental health? I'll leave that up to you. And we can go around again, and then we will wrap, and then I'll wrap up. I'll do a little summary and wrap up. Did anyone want to start on that one? Okay, good. Thank you, Mosa. And then maybe Jayda, Frida, these are your areas of expertise. Yeah, go ahead, Mosa.
Yeah, okay. Well, when we talk about art as an entry point, I just would like to speak a little bit about my arts practice, and then about, how I interact how I bring that into conversation with young people. So in my work, I consider myself to be part of a canon of Black women artists, healers, and activists who are concerned with cultural reclamation, with social justice and freedom. And in my interdisciplinary work, I work through installation, encaustic, and performance. I center the Black female subject. I riff on memory, mourning, and memorialization. And then in my sacred leadership work, I work collectively with a community of Black women, spiritual practitioners. So I see it in my work, I'm bringing together, it's a hybrid of art and spiritual practice. I'm trying to find that as an interdisciplinary practice. And so we work in our sacred leadership work to curate spaces for Black healing. There's a community of artists and community workers in the city who are dedicated to empowering Black youth through rites of passage work, as well as coming into adulthood. So yes, I'm very aware, as Joy was saying, that when young people start to become aware of the systemic oppressions that impact their lives, sharing stories, making art, it can really trigger strong emotions, bring up difficult memories or feelings of inadequacy, and leave students feeling really raw and overwhelmed. So because I'm a guest in the classroom and I have sometimes short-term projects, I always structure my projects with opening, closing rituals to create a container of as the, it's not exactly safety, as as Sam was saying, but it is, at least it holds space in a way for vulnerable sharing. And then the learners, then they can, write poetry, then perform their poetry of what it means to be Black. What does Black self-love look like, and incorporate those ideas into their artwork, into their poetry. So that's what I would say about that.
Great, thank you. Jayda, did you want to?
Yeah, sure. I'll go next. I think art for me was an entry point to a lot of things. I wrote my whole life, but when I was about 13 or 14, I heard rappers like Kendrick Lamar, Joey Badass, No Name. Like, there's these certain rappers that I heard, and I heard them talk about the Black experience in a way that I never heard before. I'd never heard that before. And I grew up in Jana Finch, so most of the rap music that I would hear was a lot different from those artists that I discovered. And when I first heard those artists, I began to write spoken word poetry. And this was about a couple of weeks after Unity had come to my school. And I saw those spoken word artists, and I thought to myself, I'm like, wow, that's like super cool. But I remember everyone in my class was just like, oh, like, it's kind of lame, like, it's not like rap and things like that. But it really, really stuck with me, those artists from Unity, because I always felt like my voice needed to be on a microphone, it needed to be heard, and I never really thought I could do it. And writing my first spoken word piece was a journey. I did it for a talent show, and after that I had so many opportunities, and I never thought by age 16 I'd be performing over like 30, 40 places, right? And now I don't even know how many places I've performed now, but it was really just this whole window to another place, hearing people talk about the real Black experience in North America. And yeah, so I think that art is such an important thing for us to hear. And I think that we always hear people talking down on our art forms, on Black art, on how Black art is only urban, and it's only this, and it's only that, and it's only for these types of people. But Black art is something that everyone can appreciate. I think that it would just, I don't know, it's just so watered down to say that only Black people can understand Black art. I think if everyone heard Black artists, and everyone heard these artists pouring out their souls, then they would maybe try to understand. And I think when it comes to spoken word, when I first started going into schools, because I'm so young, I felt like people would doubt me. People would see me and be like, oh, like, who's this? Like, she looks like she just graduated, which, it's true, but I won't tell them. But when I go in and I perform, their perspective just changes, and everything they thought changes after they hear it, because they're like, wow, I can relate to that. Or, wow, where did you grow up? Because I experienced that too. And what school did you go to? Because I feel like that might have happened to my friend. And so when youth hear these things and they hear that you can relate to them, it's so much more important to them, and it almost gives them that window too. And I think that if it's not a spoken word artist, it could be a painter, and if it's not a painter, it could be a dancer. And so it's important that we try all of those things in classrooms with youth. We can't just try one and then some youth don't take to it, and then it's like, whatever, we don't try again, right? We have to try with all these different types of art forms, because there are so many. And so, yeah, I think art is a huge entry point to talk about anti-Black racism, to talk about the Black experience in general, because we are not just people who are oppressed, right? We have so much more to us. And we did not begin with slavery. And so I think it's important to talk about all of those things when it comes to art, not just the struggle that we face.
Thank you. Frida?
Okay. Yeah, so with art, art is connection. Like, for me, even in terms of identity, when we talk about identity, I feel like that's the best place to start to kind of connect to your roots. So I'm from Rwanda, and one thing, I don't know the language. I was born here, so I don't know the language. There is a disconnect, because when I go there, I don't understand people. Sometimes I'm still learning the culture, but the way I connect is through dance. So doing the traditional dancing, and then actually being able to perform and being good at it. And that's how I connect. So that's my way of doing things. And I feel like with art, it can connect so many people to their identity. And even if you might not understand a particular culture, music's universal. You feel things within the instrumentals, the lyrics. It tells a story, and that's a way you can connect and unify. And it's a great place to start the dialogue, to start a discussion. One thing, working with youth, I work with Black youth in conflict with the law, and sometimes they don't even know that they've experienced racism. Like they just think overt racism, like someone blatantly, you know, saying something just straight out racist, but they don't understand like the systems. And when you kind of break those down, like, okay, what happens to you when you go on the bus or like in the mall or in your community, and they tell stories, and I'm like, well, that was racist. That was racism. And they're like, what? So, and then even using music, because sometimes they can't articulate themselves. There's so many emotions. We've been desensitized. Like we don't even know like what's normal, what's not. Like, so even using like hip hop to kind of start that dialogue to help and support you to articulate how they feel. And that's what I do with my music. For the longest time, being challenged on my Blackness or not loving myself, not loving my hair, you know, which took me a long time to rock my natural hair, a very, 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 very long time. And I still have my moments. Just really understanding like how I've been brainwashed and like unlearning, and how colonization played a huge role in our lives, in my life, and how I like what beauty means. What is beauty? Like, who defines these things? And it's kind of like with this poem, Little Black Girl, it was a message to young Black girls saying like, you're beautiful. Like, love your skin, love your melanin, love your fro. Like, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And that's what I had to tell myself. It took me a very long time, and I'm still on that journey. And I encourage those to educate themselves, to learn, and really tap in to self. I feel like we really got to look at the self, and whatever way we can kind of cope and kind of express that, whether it's through art, whether like the visual art or like spoken word or music, we got to use that to heal. And healing is the biggest part too, because we're hurt and we need to start somewhere. And I feel like art is the best place to start. So thank you.
Thank you. Quinton, would you like to expand?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've saw in the comments that people were asking for us to use actual art piece examples. And one of my favorite art pieces that the AGO acquired is Esma Mahmoud's piece of the high chair. And in a lot of my recent workshops, as I've been developing Afrofuturism as an art pedagogy through STEAM, once again, M representing metaphysics, as it relates to mental health and wellness, I always give students a chance to meditate. And meditate doesn't have to be yoga and all these, you know what I mean? It can just be a simple thing, you know what I mean? It can just be a simple thing where you just breathe and observe yourself in that moment, in that present, and allow yourself to just process your body, you know what I mean? And process the experience, the sensation that you're having. And I allow students to express, what do you feel? Some of them will be confused. Some of them will be like, well, it's interesting. And then we break that down, you know, we call it VSI, you know, we're using visual strategies, you know, visual learning strategies to allow them to understand what they're experiencing, but then internalize it by breathing it out, right? So I really always encourage mindfulness, but then connect it to history. What does a high chair now mean when we're speaking about it in a different context? What's the history behind this high chair? What does it mean to be on a high chair? You know what I mean? What connections can we make? So one of the things I really love about my master's program is now giving me the tools, and now also giving me methods. So my method now is connectivism. So how can I allow this person to connect to this art piece? Because as Frida said, art is the best tool, right? And everything around us is art, right? Everything came from someone's mind, someone's creativity. And so I end my point with saying, I always leave my students and I always leave people with hope. You know what I mean? Because when we look at history, as messed up as it has been, there's been progress. You know what I mean? Society has been changing as we see through the things that we are pointing out, and that there's hope that we collectively can make it better. And art really points to that as we look at how art has progressed as well, right? The type of representations that we see in art, the type of art that's being collected and represented in institutions. And so the last part is I encourage people to start asking questions. What are the things that you want to see for the future? And then last part is for that person to figure out how can they work towards that they want to see, right? What is the thing that makes you feel hopeful, makes you feel good about the future, and how can you work on it in the now? And once again, that brings it back to the meditation, the mindfulness, the metaphysics of now being present. The power of now, essentially. Big book. Not written by a Black person, though.
Thank you. So I think I'm just gonna, I'm gonna do my 10-minute warning. We will not, is there anyone else that would like to contribute to using art in the classroom around anti-Black racism? I think we've got Emmanuel, Sam, Joy. Any last?
Yeah, I could
Please.
go quickly. I think art, as I've seen students that I work with, particularly Black students, I use it as a subversive medium, right? As a subversive means to so often, at least in the classroom space, say or point to or register maybe things they've not been able to say, right? So many of the comments or so many of the things that we've been hearing lately is so many teachers, particularly non-Black teachers, who have a hesitation or a difficulty or asking, how do we talk about this, right? And this comes up when I teach teacher candidates or when I do stuff with the boards or consult, is that I want us to explore or to think deeply about how we can graduate so many teachers in this country and province who don't have any facility with race, with thinking about this moment with students, right? It's incredible that we're all in a pandemic and virtually instruction and all that. But many teachers, particularly white teachers, who are predominantly the teachers we have in this province, are uncomfortable with speaking about race. So they don't enter it into the classroom. Meanwhile, we know it's there. It's in the thickness, it's in the air we breathe, it's in the weather, as Christina Sharp would say, professor at York. So to think about that, right? And I've seen so many immediately like subversive creative examples where Black youth still point to or talk to, speak to race in the Canadian context through art, right? And they smuggle that into the conversation. So that brings me lots of joy. And just, I guess, to address one of the questions is, and Joy said it, is to create the conditions to have a dangerous classroom, right? A classroom that is not afraid to engage these topics every day. And the idea that race is actually in every subject, once one enters the door of the school, it's in every curriculum, every subject matter, every teacher, it interacts with every student. So how do we think about, and I try to do this with teacher candidates, is to get everybody uncomfortable with perhaps saying the wrong thing and then still staying in the space, still making the space dangerous. Because if it's a safe classroom, it's gonna be really hard for me to come every day to work. I'd rather it be unpredictable controversies so that we can break through the decorum of political correctness and really get to grappling with the reality that we share.
Thank you. Emmanuel?
Yeah, I was
And then
thinking
Joy,
about,
couple minutes.
yeah, last year I was the co-chair of the African Diaspora Youth Conference, and we used theater to speak, to give Black youth the opportunity to speak to some of their experiences. And one of the most amazing things that came from that was joy and laughter, because in all of this, like though art is always cathartic or often cathartic, we need a laugh, right? Like even with the marches, there are moments of joy, there are moments of playing Tupac, right? And in those moments, these young people were able to share strategies with other kids from cities and towns, from the States, from Toronto, from Windsor, that they've never met but had very similar experiences, right? So again, building on what Sam just said with the dangerous classroom, right? Like art, or I think it was Musa that originally said it, dealing with that right there and then having those conversations happen within your midst. How do you now talk to students, right? And I think that's a question, like, to go back to your first question, Audrey, that we're still working through. And part of it is allowing them to talk for themselves in those moments, right? Allowing them to laugh with one another and to understand one another and understand that it's okay to cry. It's okay to laugh, and it's okay to speak to these issues within a public space, and that they, again, are not silent. So yeah, this conversation is incredible, and I'm really, I'm grateful for you all. For real.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Joy, did you want to have, you've got a minute?
I'll be really quick.
Thank you.
You know, so I teach visual arts design. I teach the arts and social science, which is a fabulous pairing. But often in the art classes, I start off by saying, artists are the revolutionaries. It is through the arts that you find out about what's going on in this world. right? You find out about the impacts of what's going on about this world, you know, what's happening. And with some of my Black colleagues, one of the questions we always ask ourselves are, how do we connect for our students what is happening now to the past? Because the threat, of course, is always there. And here it is, you know, the arts. I think of photography class, you know, I think of how it is that we can look at these current protest photos and then compare it with the past, like you did at the beginning of this. You know, I think about the reactions of our students to, you remember that 19th Olympics using the Black Power fist and the conversation that can ensue, just seeing where they are now. And again, beginning with the self, right? What does that mean to them currently? Do they have a context for it? And then build backwards. So starting with the now and building backwards, whether it be a photograph, an art piece where a brushstroke has so much meaning and context, or a piece of performance art. But there's so many ways in which cross-curricularly you can use the arts. I think about, you know, as a point of pride and ownership, this Eurocentric perspective of documentation. So many misdeeds have been documented through photography, right? Let's have those discussions. That's in all subject matter. So there's definitely a way of bringing art cross-curricularly to all students, right? In a way that you can have those meaningful discussions through art, which is accessible to all, to everyone. Art is accessible.
Okay, thank you. We are actually out of time, and I want to say that there are numerous questions in the Q&A. So what I'm going to do is I will attempt to answer them and share them back once we go on to AGO, once this talk is onto ago.ca. So we will get to them, just not at this moment. I want to express my gratitude, my intense gratitude and pride to be with all of you in this roundtable, and my gratitude in taking this leap and having this first conversation. The AGO is holding itself accountable. There have been talks directly with leadership team and the CEO around anti-Black racism and the next steps that they are going to make. It may be it is a work in progress, but it is happening. And so this is actually one of the first conversations to come out of the post-statement age, if you will, especially from the AGO. So thank you all for joining me. I hope that our viewers and our listeners learned something. I know that you did. And there is so much more that we can discuss, but we've given you a lot here. And I want to end with the futurity of Blackness, of Black people, Black communities, and the resiliency. Like, we have to remember how resilient we are in this time, in the past, present, and the future. So thank you all, and thank you for sharing. Thank you for joining us today. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.